Effigy mounds are earthen mounds constructed by prehistoric, or at the very least pre-Columbian cultures for a variety of purposes. Some are burial mounds, some ceremonial sites, some are possibly alien landing sites where they repair their UFOs and laser some wildlife in half for fun. Yes, I'm kidding. They were built by cultures known collectively as the Mound Builders, though that term includes numerous cultures. Among them in North America were the Adena, the Hopewell, the Fort Ancient, the Mississippian, and if Alien vs. Predator is to be believed, the Predators. Effigy mounds in North America are found as far west as Colorado, in Canada, in the lower Mississippi Valley, and along the Ohio River valleys. There are effigy mounds representing birds, bears, wolves, cool-ass looking panthers, bison, turtles, and water creatures including fish and whales. Telling the difference between the last two being surprisingly difficult, as it's hard to know if an effigy is intended to be a whale or just a really massive fish. There are also effigy mounds representing snakes or serpents. The largest of this last group and the best preserved is found in south central Ohio, known as the Great Serpent Mound. The serpent is just under 1,400 feet in length. Its tail is in a coil, which gradually unwinds into an undulating shape. The body of the serpent varies between 3 and 9 feet in height and has a width or girth if you're feeling feisty or frisky of 25 feet as it stretches toward what appears to be its head. At the opposite side, the effigy opens into a triangular shape, depicting what appears to be a gaping maw. The open jaw appears poised to swallow another mound, oval in shape, hollow in the center. When seen from above, the effigy appears to be that of a big-ass snake about to swallow an equally big egg. Or perhaps it's another creature entirely, like that alien snake from Prometheus, which, as we all know, is both realistic and a very good movie. Karl knows I hate Prometheus with a passion.
Look at you. Look at you, baby.
Jesus, look at the size of that. What is it?
In 1848, the Smithsonian published a work titled Ancient Monuments of the Mississippi Valley. One of its authors, Edwin Davis, had grown up near the Serpent Mound and was familiar with it, as well as other mounds and the cultures which built them. Ancient mounds of human construction liberally dot the region of southern Ohio, western West Virginia, and northern Kentucky, and continue through Indiana and Illinois into the Mississippi Valley. The Smithsonian Commission generated considerable interest in pre-Columbian structures, raising the question of who built them and why, what happened to the ancient cultures, and what could the effigies and other mound possibly represent. Those questions are still the subject of considerable study and debate among serious scholars, including anthropologists and archaeologists, as well as pseudoscience and biblical literalists. Even the age of the Serpent Mound remains a subject of dispute, its age being a critical factor in any discussion of which culture built it. Here are some of the arguments about the Great Serpent Mound, a subject of considerable debate and conjecture. Of course, starting with the fun stuff because we all know why you're here. Aliens. Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Eric Malachite, and this episode was written by Larry Holsworth and edited by Karl Smallwood, who has told me that he's put a bunch of stuff about aliens in this one just to mess with me because he knows I hate pseudo-archaeology. And yes, that's very funny. So be sure to show them both some love in the comments while you deploy your likes, subscribe to the channel if you're not, and share this video with someone who loves learning about ancient places and the people and legends that made them famous. Let's get to it. So the crux of the argument in favor of the Great Serpent Mound being of alien origin is that pre-Columbian cultures in North America lacked the technological wherewithal to build the Serpent Mound. As if the idea of piling up dirt and rocks to make a familiar shape is a literal alien concept and not something children do to bolster their manual dexterity. One theory posits that the effigy is a sign to space travelers, informing them that the site is a source for fuel in the form of a rare dense metal known as iridium. For the curious, this rare metal is found in the ground beneath the effigy, and the source is believed to be a meteorite that slammed into the Earth eons ago. Whether the meteorite was launched by aliens is unclear, so we have no choice, of course, but to conclude that that is the most likely explanation. Said no one ever. Anyway, to the people who are all in on the idea of aliens, they believe that the effigy is a sign announcing a fueling station, like a giant Texaco sign displayed alongside the interstate. You know, because the beings who've mastered interstellar travel might not have the ability to detect the thing their ships need to move through space, and would of course need to be guided to its location by a 1,400-foot-long phallic snake sculpture. As for how the mound was constructed, there's some debate about that among alien aficionados, with some believing that the aliens built the effigy on their own, while others insist that they merely assisted the local inhabitants in the construction of the mound, which, all things considered, is very nice of them to do.
Man, sometimes you just gotta roll the dice.
What self-respecting early human wouldn't want a giant snake effigy to flex on the other tribes? The belief in alien technology and use of the mound has led to it being the site of what can only be called vandalism from the mid-20th century to the present day. For example, in the 1930s, a German charlatan by the name of Wilhelm Reich announced the discovery of bions, which no, I'm not going to look up the pronunciation for that because it's nonsense, which he claimed was the source of all life on the planet. He soon marketed a useless device which he claimed were collectors of bions and orgones, a variation of his discovery. After moving to America in the 1930s, he gave himself over to the study of what he called orgonomy, selling orgone accumulators to his devotees. He postulated that accumulation of sufficient orgones could solve all the ills of man. Simply put, orgones absorbed negative energy and emitted positive energy. Gee, where have I heard this idea before? It's very familiar. It's almost like there's a cult that does something very similar. Reich's studies were largely directed at sexual energy, specifically the need to eliminate negative sexual energy in order to achieve complete release. Not surprisingly, he found a large market for the various devices he created to absorb and emit energy. Eventually, he went to jail, but that's another story. Also, for anyone wanting to maximize their latent alien sexual potential, you can buy a weird-ass pyramid that claims to absorb all the orgones in the immediate vicinity for a couple $100. Hey, what a deal! Alternatively, you can create a pseudo-orgone accumulator by placing a chair inside a cupboard lined with layers of organic and inorganic materials. In 2017, Serpent Mound was the subject of an attack of believers burying orgone accumulators, small muffin-sized devices which their proponents called organites. Their intent was, in essence, to reactivate the mound. When and why it became inactive was not explained. It never is. Perhaps the aliens have changed their fuel source to something more cosmically friendly. Also, can we all take a moment to appreciate the imagery of a bunch of people burying devices designated to increase sexual potency into a 1,400-foot-long snake you can see from the lower atmosphere? If there's one thing that snake doesn't need, it's more sexual power. Now, as amazing as the idea of an alien orgasm snake radiating powerful waves of positive sex energy is one we'd love to leave you with today, there are other less sexy theories about the serpent's origins, like angels. The Hebrew Bible, or the Christian Old Testament, describes a race of beings known as the Nephilim. Allegedly, they were a race of giants, having descended from fallen angels who took human women as mates. Some claim that one of the primary effects of the Great Flood described in Genesis was the destruction of the Nephilim. This theory is incorrect. Genesis 6:4 praises the Nephilim, and they appear elsewhere in the Bible, including in Ezekiel. Somehow, some Nephilim survived the flood or reappeared perhaps through supernatural means or with an assist from the aliens, and after migrating to Europe, eventually appeared in North America. There, they built the Serpent Mound as well as other effigy mounds, at least according to some, and spoilers, they're wrong. Annoyingly, the mechanics of how skyscraper-sized giants got it on with human women is never explained in the Bible, so we're unable to answer the question we all know you're thinking right now. Proponents of this theory cite scripture, other ancient documents not included in the biblical canon, such as the Book of Enoch, and the unsupported fact that at different times the skeletal remains of giants have been discovered at ancient burial sites. To them, the serpent swallowing the egg is symbolic of biblical prophecy signifying the end of days. They further cite that the pre-Columbian people, which modern science proposes as the mound builders, lacked the technological and technical know-how to erect such complex structures, whilst simultaneously arguing that the ancient people they think built the mounds somehow figured out the mechanics of having sex with a bust-sized dong. Jeez. Damn it, Karl. Finally, it is argued that only giants could look at the structure at ground level and see that it was in the shape of a serpent, since they allegedly towered over it when standing erect. One version of the Nephilim theory is that the site represents a serpent, which symbolizes the fallen angel swallowing an egg, symbolizing woman, to prevent the manifestation of the Messiah. To these folks, the Serpent Mound is a symbol of demonic defiance against their maker, built by the sons of fallen angels who were born by mortal women. Supporters of such beliefs hold frequent meetings and conferences at Serpent Mound where they expand on their theories and exchange ideas. That sounds so lame. Besides biblical giants and extraterrestrials, others have been postulated as the builders of Serpent Mound. One theory is that it was the work of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, as were the scores of mounds built in pre-Columbian America. This theory contends that the ancient American tribes did not possess requisite knowledge to build such structures, while the ancient Israelites did, having acquired it in Egypt. Although science refutes claims of alien construction, biblical giants, the lost tribes, and other examples of New Age beliefs and pseudo-scientific claims about the Serpent Mound, they are held by many, and new claims equally outlandish surface frequently. For many, the term science merely refers to conspiracies to obscure the truth, with truth being whatever belief is held to be true by the believer. The Great Serpent Mound is generally accepted to represent a snake about to swallow an egg. The egg faces east, and in more recent years, especially in the 21st century, some anthropologists have adopted the position that it isn't representative of an egg at all, but instead represents the sun. Others have concluded that the oval shape is merely what remains of an elevated platform from which humans once would have stood to view the entire shaft of the massive serpent. There are some who believe the oval represents the body of a frog or a turtle. In short, no one knows what the oval shape represents. It could even be an alien. One problem regarding the effigy is the question of who built it and why. To answer that question, it is necessary to establish the age of the structure. Prehistoric humans have been identified as being in the Ohio Valley and neighboring regions as long ago as 13,000 BC, eventually evolving into various native cultures beginning around 7,000 BC. These early humans, called Paleo-Indians by researchers, were hunter-gatherers, though there is evidence of early agriculture in the form of sunflowers harvested for seeds. These seeds may have been ground into a paste and cooked on heated stones or in clay pots in later days of the period. The primary source of food for these early humans was game, which was hunted with spears tipped with stone heads, or was snuck up on and beaten to death with large rocks. Among the game harvested by Paleo-Indians were mastodons. In the early 1980s, a nearly whole mastodon skeleton was unearthed and excavated on a golf course near Columbus, Ohio. The ribs of the mastodon bore marks consistent with being butchered by primitive blades. The mastodon, called Burning Tree Mastodon, that is an incredibly metal name, after the golf course where it was discovered, slightly less metal, is the most complete mastodon skeleton yet unearthed, one of more than 150 found in Ohio, and was dated to have lived about 11,000 years ago or around 9,000 BC. Eventually, the Paleo-Indians evolved into cultures centered in regions and developed lifestyles supported by the features of the region. This period, beginning in roughly 800 BC, is known as the Woodland period. Several cultures evolved, as it were, on top of each other, and it was likely one of these cultures which created the Serpent Mound. Mound builders were common during the Woodland period in Ohio and surrounding regions, in Wisconsin and further north westwards to Iowa and Colorado and south to the lower Mississippi. The Indians of the Woodland period developed relatively large towns, traded with each other, developed early agriculture focused on maize and beans, as well as gourds and squash, and developed ceremonial rituals celebrating the seasons of the year, heavenly bodies, various deities, and life and death. The latter was met with increasingly complex burial rituals, including in some cases cremation. One of the largest such cultures emerged during the early Woodland period. It was called the Adena. The term Adena is used by anthropologists and researchers to refer to the shared culture of pre-Columbian Indians living in the general area of the Ohio River Valley, with its center located between the Scioto River and the Hocking River, both tributaries of the Ohio. The Adena culture encompassed many individual groups or tribes in what became West Virginia, Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. They were hunter-gatherers, manufactured pots of clay from river bottoms, harvested crops, and built relatively large settlements. The Adena culture were people of the earth. They built their homes by digging into the ground, covering the whole with a roof of bark, and they interred their dead in the earth in the form of burial mounds in elaborate ceremonies. As a matter of fact, an Adena burial mound in Miamisburg, Ohio is the largest burial mound in Ohio, and the second largest in the United States. It is a cone-shaped man-made hill 65 feet in height, with a base circumference of about 800 feet. Throughout the 20th century, most researchers attributed construction of the Serpent Mound to the Adena. More recent research has challenged that long-held belief, though. By the first decade AD, the Adena culture had faded, replaced by the emerging Hopewell culture. Both the rising Hopewell and fading Adena cultures continued to build burial mounds, as well as ceremonial mounds throughout the region. Eventually, around 1000 AD, another culture arose from the combination of the Hopewell and Adena. They are referred to as the Fort Ancient, and they dominated the region for the ensuing 7 centuries. Fort Ancient is an earthwork in Ohio, located on a rise overlooking the Little Miami River, not far from today's Mason, Ohio. It is neither a fort nor ancient in age, though. The earthwork was likely built by the Hopewell culture and eventually occupied and maintained by the Fort Ancients. Its role is believed to have been ceremonial. The Fort Ancients were the last of the prehistoric cultures to occupy the region, and as far as we know, they did not have direct contact with the European explorers that pushed into their region near the end of their culture. They had extensive trade contacts with people of the Mississippian culture, evidenced by the artifacts found in archaeological sites which are reflective of the cultures of the lower Mississippi Valley. They also had trade contacts to the east with the Monongahela peoples of western Pennsylvania. Like their predecessors, the Hopewell and Adena, they were hunter-gatherers, lived in communities of several hundred people, and were mound builders. Again, it's very important to clarify that the idea of making a big pile of stuff wasn't exactly a bold or innovative concept. The Fort Ancients, along with the last vestiges of the Hopewell and Adena cultures, succumbed by the mid-17th century, likely due to disease. Though they had no direct contact with Europeans, they did have indirect contact through mutual trade with other cultures. With no natural immunity and no medical expertise, they were helpless to fight the plagues that arrived in North America. The next major Indian culture to dominate the region were the Shawnee north of the Ohio, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee to the south, east, and west, and the Lakes tribes to the north. One of these pre-Columbian cultures, the Adena, the Hopewell, or the Fort Ancient, built the Great Serpent Mound for purposes not yet wholly explained. Scientists and researchers still debate which one, interrupted on occasion by the conjecture of those claiming the mound to be the work of giants or aliens, or maybe giant aliens. Throughout the 20th century, it was generally agreed that Serpent Mound had been built by the Adena people, though its purpose was unknown. It was not a burial mound. In fact, no identifiable artifact has ever been extracted from the mound which could link it to any culture. The mound is constructed almost completely of ash and clay, with a stabilizing base of rocks. Some archaeologists also claim the presence of charcoal, though that is disputed. Admittedly, a bit less so than the idea of aliens using various space rays to aid in its construction, but still. In the early 21st century, advanced techniques for determining the age of the structure indicated that it was built much more recently than originally surmised, perhaps as recently as 1000 or 1200 AD. That date range places the mound well outside the Adena culture, and the selection of the animal used for the effigy, a snake, indicates to some that it may have had some connection with the Mississippian culture, known to have been trading partners with the Fort Ancients. This group argued that the Serpent Mound was built by the Fort Ancient culture, probably around 1200 AD and perhaps as late as 1350 AD. In 2014, a group known as the Ancient Earthworks Project refuted the later construction hypothesis. They used advanced techniques of a technical nature far too arcane to discuss here in the allotted time to establish that the Serpent Mound was at least 2,000 years old, and in their discussion described their belief that it was actually much older. They also discussed the excavation of Adena artifacts, including pieces of ancient tools from sites nearby. Finally, they addressed the assertion that geological evidence tying the Fort Ancient culture to the Serpent Mound was actually evidence that the later culture had performed maintenance maintenance on the effigy, in effect repairing erosion damage. Was that the last word on the subject? Not a chance. In 2018, a group of archaeologists published a study in the Cambridge Archaeological Journal titled Arguments for the Age of Serpent Mound. They argued that the data in the 2014 study was faulty, assumptions regarding dating were incorrect, and that the effigy was not old enough to have been built by the Adena culture. They also pointed out that the Adena built burial mounds, but no other effigy mound had ever been attributed to them. In addition, they pointed out that the Fort Ancient culture had built other effigy mounds, including the Alligator Mound near Granville, Ohio. They also pointed out that the snake had no known symbolism in Adena culture, though it did in the cultures which traded with the Fort Ancients. This argument is far from complete. Who built the effigy and when are two questions which remain unanswered. Except to those who argue it was giants or aliens or one of the lost tribes, they provide the answers to the questions with absolute certainty and no evidence. Thus far, I guess science cannot refute those answers with a definitive answer of its own. The oval that sits within the open jaws of the serpent is not the end of the mound. On the opposite side of the open mouth outside the oval is a triangle of earth, its base curving with the arc of the oval, its point on the opposite side. In 1987, a study was published which established that the point, and thus the head of the serpent itself, points to the sunset on the evening of the summer solstice, the longest day of the year. Why this is significant, or even if it is significant, is unknown. Archaeologists who accept the theory that the mound was built around 1000 to 1100 AD, the most widely accepted hypothesis, have suggested that astronomical events which occurred in the 11th century may have influenced the builders. Halley's Comet, which is as reliable as a clock when considering events of the past and future, made its periodic appearance in the year 1066 AD. Scientists have suggested that the comet, easily visible in the heavens in those days of no light pollution, could have inspired the effigy. However, Halley's Comet presents a straight tail, fanning outwards, not a sinuous outline suggestive of a snake. However, astronomers now know that a supernova occurred in 1054 AD, which created what is known as the Crab Nebula. The celestial event would have been visible in daylight for at least 10 days and would have presented a spectacular sight in the night sky. Did it inspire the Indians or aliens cruising on by to commemorate it with an effigy? No one knows for sure. It seems far more likely that the effigy reflects one of the myths or beliefs of the people residing in the region at the time. It may have been established as a ceremonial mound, a monument, or a celebration. It may have been reflective of a myth. One such myth is a creation myth. Warren County, Missouri is the site of a cave which holds over 290 pictographs drawn by Paleo-Indians. Many of these drawings have been interpreted as representing Indian myths and stories, including myths regarding the creation of the earth and the human race. The artworks, many of which are about 1,000 years old, have been attributed to Mississippian culture, and some of the legends depicted in the drawings can be found in Siouan culture, which at one time was represented in Ohio. Siouan culture existed in Ohio near the end of the Fort Ancient culture. One such legend has a woman mating with the great serpent of the underworld. In the Missouri cave painting, a figure appearing to be a woman straddles an oval with her legs. The oval is believed to represent the jaws of the serpent. In the Siouan legend, the woman mates with the serpent to acquire his powers, which she then uses to create all life. It's interesting to consider that numerous ancient peoples considered the sun to be feminine. The Great Serpent Mound is aligned to the sun on the summer solstice. It contains other symbols from the Siouan creation legend, an egg, and the Great Serpent. Was it built simply to celebrate an ancient creation myth? It seems as good an explanation as any other. It's also sexy enough to perhaps sway those who feel the mound was built by giant horny angel monsters. At one time, there were thousands of mounds built by prehistoric humans in North America. The majority of them did not survive Western settlements, succumbing to the plow, settlements, irrigation, and all the other signs of progress. When the Great Serpent Mound was encountered by settlers, it was not protected in any way. It had been damaged by vandals, curious diggers, amateur archaeologists, and others by the late 19th century. In the 1880s, it was acquired by Harvard University, which had a museum curator named Frederick Putnam restore the site. Putnam had no idea how the site appeared when it was built. Without a before image to guide his restoration, he had little choice but to restore it to his own vision of how it should look. His only guide was the 1848 survey, which had included a drawing. He decided the effigy was of a snake swallowing an egg, and that was how he restored it, before returning to his duties at Harvard's Peabody Museum. The small triangular shape opposite the open mouth held little significance to his interpretation and so was not restored. The point is that the Great Serpent Mound may have once had many other details which may have given clues as to its meaning and its significance to its builders. And if it did, they are gone forever. That's the story of the Great Serpent Mound, an effigy built for reasons unknown by a people unknown at a time unknown. It continues to generate as many questions as it does answers. One can gaze at it through the filter of one's personal beliefs and give it any stature one wishes. Maybe it really was built by giants. Maybe one of the lost tribes of Israel built it. There are certainly other legends linking the lost tribes with early America. Maybe aliens visited the site and left the effigy as a mark, or maybe they assisted the Adena or Hopewell or Fort Ancient or some altogether different culture in creating it. But the question would be, why? Why would they do that? Why would they care? The truth is, the Great Serpent Mound is an unsolved mystery which guards its secrets well. Whether those secrets are ever revealed to the complete satisfaction of all those interested is highly unlikely, to say the least. I hope you learned something today, and if you're someone who believes in pseudo-archaeology, please do yourself a favor and check out Mini Minuteman, a channel run by an actual archaeologist who debunks pseudo-archaeological claims by people like Graham Hancock, the guy who made Ancient Apocalypse, by exposing their blatant lies. The link will be in the description. And of course, be sure to deploy your likes, comment your favorite thing about Serpent Mound, and share this video with someone who enjoys learning about places and the people that made them famous. I'm Eric Malachite, and we'll see you next time.